So as part of this conference, we always have some healing stories by people who have dealt with cancer, and cancer has in some way been a turning point for them. Our story today comes from Pam Quillin, who is a brain tumor survivor and one of the volunteers on the steering committee for this conference, for the planning of the conference. Pam is proud to be an alumni of the very first Healing Journeys Cancer is a Turning Point conference, which was in 1994 in Monterey. And I'm not going to tell the rest of her story because I would steal her thunder, because she's going to tell it to you. Please welcome Pam Quillin.
My name is Pam Quillin, and this is the story of my healing journey. I grew up in a big family, the third of 7 kids. When I was pretty young, about 7, I realized that my parents were not Ozzie and Harriet. They were unhappy, angry, and abusive. I didn't know the word dysfunctional then, but I did know that it was not a pleasant way to live. I remember well that I had a chat with God about it. I said, "Okay, God, I know that everyone will have some hardship in their life, and I guess this is mine, so I'll deal with it. Please just remember that I've had my share as a kid, so the rest of my life should be pretty good." That thought sustained me as my parents' alcoholism, gambling, and other problems destroyed them. At 30, I married a kind and loving guy, Rob, he's out there somewhere, and we decided to start our family, but we couldn't get pregnant, in spite of going through 5 years of all kinds of invasive, unpleasant, and downright embarrassing fertility procedures, drugs, and surgeries. I said, "Hey, God, what's the deal? Did you forget I'm the one who had the terrible parents? What's going on?" And then we found a counseling-based adoption group, and we were blessed to be present at the birth of our daughter, Caitlin Susanna, in May of 1989. Being a mom was the most wonderful experience for me. I loved every single minute of it, even the stinky and sleepy ones. And Rob and I were eager to do it again. Then in the summer of '93, we went to a neighbor's anniversary party. I sang a silly song I'd made up to celebrate, went home to bed, and woke up in a new world. There were firemen surrounding my bed, asking me my name, what year it was, and who was president. I thought they were cute, but odd. I'd had a grand mal seizure in the middle of the night, and my life was forever changed. A couple weeks and my first MRI later, we learned that inside my skull was a golf ball-sized brain tumor. I figured God had forgotten all about the other stuff I'd been through. I told Rob that I'd hate to leave him, but that we'd already had a great life together, and I knew he'd be okay. What I couldn't bear was the thought of not being there to help him raise Caitlin. She was barely 4 years old. I was determined to survive. During the surgery that followed, the brain surgeon determined that the tumor, an oligodendroglioma, who's going to spell that one, couldn't be removed after all, because it was not encapsulated as they'd originally thought, and it was too close to the speech and motor control areas of my brain. Back then, there was no chemo that could cross the blood-brain barrier, and no treatment option other than 6 weeks of full brain radiation. So I said, let's go for it. My radiation oncologist was a great guy, but he had no belief in any kind of alternative treatment or complementary medicine, which were way outside of conventional medicine at that time. So he began 6 weeks of daily radiation to my head and said my prognosis was 5 or maybe even 10 years. I wanted more. I'd heard about Norman Cousins, a well-known writer, who believed that he'd recovered from a potentially fatal illness by continuous exposure to humor and laughter. The Three Stooges, Candid Camera, and Lucille Ball were his drugs of choice. I'd always been a cockeyed optimist, so I read his book, Anatomy of an Illness, and all the books of Bernie Siegel, an East Coast doc who was an early and strong proponent of the mind-body connection. His book, Love, Medicine, and Miracles, became my touchstone. I found a radiation meditation tape That's a cassette tape. Some of you may have to ask what that is. And I listened and breathed to it every day. This may go better. As I began the daily radiation treatments, I was tense, anxious, even terrified. But I decided not to just lay there with my head fastened to the table, alone and in fear. I could hear the sound of dripping water in the room where I lay. I decided that it came from a tiny stream somewhere in the mountains. I pictured the beautiful setting in my mind's eye, and I visualized it as I received the treatments day after day. It was getting near Christmas, and I even thought of a phrase from a verse of Silent Night. Radiant beams from heaven afar. I decided that my radiant beams were good and healing, and I relaxed to receive them, resting on my creek bank. Unknowingly, I'd created my own form of guided imagery, and I realize now that we all have it in us to create our own healing experience.